Hi, this is Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and let's talk about yarn preferences. So this is more of a discussion and me talking about what I like compared to what you might like might be very different. Um, I've noticed some trends, and it's just mostly talking trends, and this is not going to fit anybody uniformly. So let's start. Most people seem to fall into two general categories regarding yarn weight. So there's thin yarn people and thick yarn people. And I noticed the big difference between those is a lot of the feel of the yarn as it's going through. I am a fine yarn person. I like thinner yarn. Fingering weight is kind of my perfect weight of yarn. Lace weight's a little bit too thin. DK and worsted weight I'll use, but I like the delicate feeling of thin yarn. Some people, however, get very frustrated with thin yarn. You could have arthritis. You could just want to get something done quickly, in which case thicker yarn makes a lot more sense. And liking that and the feel of that, this has nothing to do with softness. It is purely the thickness of the yarn. There are some people who like animal fibers. There are some people who like plant fibers, and there are some people who like acrylic fibers, or man-made fibers, acrylic being the main one of those. And that can be for a variety of reasons. Vegans do not use animal fibers. You might not like the feel of cotton because it tends to not be very soft and it's not very stretchy. You might not like the plastic feeling of acrylic, and you could be allergic to any of these. So, there's a dampener there. And I also noticed that there's a bit of a split on fiber type when it comes to knitting versus crochet. I've noticed that crocheters tend to craft a lot faster than knit people. So they might be a little bit more sensitive to a slightly rougher yarn because it's slipping through their fingers a lot faster, potentially causing rug burn. But they tend to like more of the acrylic stuff because it's less expensive. And when you're banging through an entire ball of yarn in one evening, potentially two, depending on how fast you crochet and how thick it is, having something that's easily accessible like acrylic and doesn't cost very much means you can keep up with how fast you craft. Versus knitters, because they spend a lot more time with a particular yarn, because it's a slower going process. Also, a knit stitch is literally just the height of the width of your knitting needles, versus in crochet, you could be doing something that's the same height, twice the height, 3 times the height for every row. So it goes a lot faster. And because you're actually spending more time with it and it's not whipping through your hands as quickly, feeling its softness, and it needs to be a little bit more spongy and stretchy so that you can fit 2 knitting needles in it so you can pull through the next loop. Those are qualities that are much more necessary. So I've noticed crocheters tend to like the acrylic yarns more, and knitters tend to like wool and wool blend yarns a lot more, though that's not mutually exclusive by any stretch. So as for me, I like thin, natural fibers a lot. Now, I don't necessarily use unprocessed fibers. I definitely, whenever I can, I get superwash with some kind of a strengthener like nylon or silk or something in it. It doesn't really matter as long as it's a little bit stronger, because, I walk and I move my arms. I don't want it to wear out in my pits. So if it's good for socks, it's good for pretty much anything else, in my opinion. And I like thinner yarns. I always kind of had this bad experience with thicker yarns. When I was in kindergarten, we had these little cardboard squares that had an image on it. Like I really remember one with Ariel from The Little Mermaid, and it had these holes punched out. And then you were given this thick yarn that had tape around each end. So it was kind of like a needle without being sharp. And you could feed that yarn through the holes as if you were sewing. It was a very good beginner, getting kids with no fine motor skills able to hand sew. And I remember being in kindergarten before I turned 5 and being able to do it and have neat little ups and downs stitches, whereas a lot of my fellow students had a lot of knots. But I hated using that yarn. It didn't feel good. It felt very plasticky, as I now understand it is, and it was very thick, and it wasn't fun to use. And when I started crocheting my 7-year blanket, which has several different types of yarn, because I didn't realize there were different brands and different styles of acrylic. All of my favorite sections of that blanket that were made with a slightly thinner and slightly softer yarn are my favorites. I didn't realize there were different types. And my absolute favoriteest, I actually got for the first time, I think in 2017 or early 2018, when I was just starting, really get into crocheting like big time. I went to my LYS and I got a hank of Cascade Heritage Silk, and I got it in this really fugly green color. I wound up making a valance with that yarn out of crochet, and I loved using it. It had the stretch, and you ever notice how we describe things with different senses? So like this yarn was chewy. I didn't eat it, but it had this nice chewiness to it and beautiful stitch definition. It was delicate, and I created this really beautiful pattern with it that you could really see, and it had a great feel and texture and springiness to it. That was absolutely lovely, and that's still my favorite yarn, my favoriteest of all the yarns to crochet with. And it's really nice in knitting, but for a very different reason, because it creates a very drapey fabric that is lovely for shawls and feels really nice in socks, because yes, it's thinner, and yes, it does pill pretty badly, but it's nice in the sense that it drapes. It's a thinner yarn. And I don't really like thick socks. I like thinner socks that have more of a drape to it. It still does the springiness thing where it comes back to shape like you want socks to do, but it just has this much nicer feel on my feet, which are sensitive little prima donnas. So, let's keep it at that. And I love that yarn also because it's always in solids. I don't know if you've noticed, but I like using solid and semi-solid colors because you can put the colors together in a way that makes sense, and you're not at risk of pooling. So that's me. And that's my personal preference, is fingering weight yarn with a man-edited natural fiber. And not saying I don't use anything else, I most certainly do, but that's my favorite yarn to use. What's your favorite? Tell me in the comments down below, and we might have a nice discussion. Now, I know some people love yarns that other people have ethical issues with. My personal belief on this is that at this stage, no matter what kind of yarn you do, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I'm probably going to make a separate video about the ethics of yarn choices, where I'm going to get majorly yelled at regardless of what I say. But let's just keep everything civil regarding that. Happy crafting. Bye.